to this hard-fought democracy with experiences that really make me question it, and quite often. When I think of responsible citizenship and participation, my immediate point of reference is that of the 2015-2016 student protests, which called for free decolonized education and also aimed to problematize the overall state of education in South Africa, highlighting severe inequality and unchanged systems of power. While I have a couple of issues with the conceptualization of the word citizen as far as identity and belonging is concerned, it is the word responsible that I'd like to draw your attention to. We as agents of social change have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but to our future and future generations. And I believe that it is my generation that is responsible to take up the baton and continue the fight of those who came before us. The reality is that there are many deep-seated and structural issues that our transition and nation-building project has failed to address. We as young people, we have inherited these issues, compounded by the reality of intergenerational trauma and mental health. Injustice remains omnipresent in our society, and with growing discontent and valid anger, people are starting to question and rise up and boldly challenge the status quo. In the country of the haves and the have-nots, inequality in all its manifestations remains a lived reality for most and is echoed along lines of race, class, and gender. And that's something that we cannot ignore. And it is the persistence of these perpetual systems of power, privilege, and poverty that the dream of freedom, true freedom, remains exactly that, just a dream. We exist in a context where a black person is 4 times more likely to be unemployed than a white person. The average income for a white family is 6 times greater than for a black family. The reality is that our people are struggling with minimal opportunities, be it educational, political, economic, or social. All this in face of continued environmental degradation. Responsible and active citizenship could also be understood as participation, and according to Afrobarometer data, youth participation in particular is on the decline. And this is a phenomenon that I'd like to explore a little bit more holistically, and I do so by asking the question of why is it that young people prefer to abstain from participating in the formal democratic institutions that were created in our transition. I would in fact argue that shunning these democratic institutions in and of itself is a message. A key underpinning of social movement theory, for example, is that marginalized people or marginalized groups are often left to fend for themselves when they are failed and overlooked by the structures that ought to represent them. And perhaps this is a lens that can help inform how it is that we understand participation, and in particular youth participation, in a way that is more reflective of growing concerns and tensions amongst marginalized people who mobilize outside of the status quo. And if I could bring this example a little closer to home, this week the urban land justice movement here in Cape Town has been rightfully reinserting questions around the politics of disruption. And I think maybe today in this space, that is something that we can reflect on here together, and how the politics of disruption is, particularly when it pertains to a marginalized group, how does that tie in with the idea of responsible citizenship? Last month, on June 16, we commemorated the generation of 1976 in South Africa who taught us that young people really possess the resilience to fight for change. And today I believe that young people across the continent, my generation, that we also possess the means to drive our continent forward. And one important obstacle that we will have to navigate is the lack of cohesion between older and younger generations. There is this massive intergenerational gap that we have been unable to bridge. And I think that that is an important way for us to accelerate this wave of revolution that is slowly unfolding in the hearts and minds of African young people, Africans in general. The bridging of this major disjuncture requires intergenerational conversation, a tool that we can use to strengthen our vehicles for social change. As we, the younger generation, we learn from the wisdom and experience of those who have fought before us, while those who have fought before us learn a little something from our bold spirit, our radical sort of modus operandi, our ideas and our lived experience. And I think that that could be such a mutually beneficial relationship, driving us and accelerating us forward. The truth is that our revolution is incomplete, and it is clear that the modus operandi from here on forward needs to be justice before reconciliation. And if I can go a little bit deeper, one could even argue that the modus operandi going forward needs to be justice as reconciliation. There is an urgent need for us to dismantle systems and beliefs that uphold and perpetuate violence. There is an urgent need for us to establish a collective consciousness that is characterized by justice, accountability, and the full realization of another's humanity. It is with this in mind that I leave you with the following. How can we influence social change in the different spaces we inhabit within society? How can we challenge violent attitudes and behaviors in our spaces that oppress and dehumanize people? How can we engage with our history from a decolonial standpoint so that we can better understand the issues that we sit with today, and so that we can also find collective and intersectional solutions to these very issues? Lastly, how can those of us who are in close proximity to privilege and power redirect our energies towards leveraging our proximity to privilege and power to further social justice causes? These are all questions that I believe remain central to reimagining a better future. And these are also all issues that I believe go far beyond the legacy of one man. Thank you.